Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to Community Talk, Toronto. I'm one of your co-hosts, Bhagwant Singh.
And I'm your other co-host, Martin Singh. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
This week's topic, we had some viewers who are not so familiar with Martin Singh, and they were kind enough to send an email to us, and they're asking, a little bit about, there's two of you there. One's born into the faith and one came into the faith. What are some of the things that you researched when you actually joined the faith? Mm-hmm. And I actually, I asked this as someone who's born into the faith, because some of these things I've never really thought about, never thought through.
Sure.
But you may have looked into, for example, people talk about, heaven and hell, or reincarnation. So let's start with heaven and hell. Obviously, you came from a Christian background.
Oh yeah, and they're all about heaven and hell, right? In fact, when you look at the Christian faith, it's spoken about a lot. You don't get as much of it being very fully present in say the Canadian social dynamic, but certainly American Christians talk about it significantly. But for me, what was fascinating is that I never ever really particularly identified with it. To have some physical space that exists whereby there is a heaven, and conversely, to have some physical space whereby you're eternally damned in hell, didn't for me, it didn't speak to my own belief path, right? And so I stepped away from that.
My understanding, and I really want to hear from you on this, is heaven and hell is here on us, according to the Sikh doctrine. Mm-hmm. When you were researching the Sikh faith, how did you sort of tackle this topic or look into this topic?
Well, your point was a very good one, and it speaks exactly to how I viewed it, meaning that we work to engage ourselves and our families and our communities such that we either create our heaven or hell for ourselves, right? Some folks, focus a lot on karma and what karma means for your next life. I would argue that karma has a way of impacting your own life right now, in fact. There are cases where we see this explicitly, meaning people commit crimes and they are charged and convicted and go to prison. But there are also more implicit ways that it happens, whereby if you act in favor of your own personal ego instead of in the favor of your fellow common human being, that you will suffer in life rather than succeed. And so for me, what it is, and what I really appreciated about Sikhism is that it was instructive, to me first as an individual, meaning my first responsibility is to, be a good Sikh. Beyond that is to make sure that, I work to help take care of the family, and then beyond that, the community, partly faith community and partly the community that exists beyond our own faith group.
But did you, how did you understand heaven and hell? What literature did you read? Just for our viewers who want to, what literature did you read that try to understand the Sikh concept of heaven and hell?
Yeah, well, I would say that those pieces that I read didn't really speak of heaven and hell, really. It's not that the terms weren't mentioned, but because it's not part of our faith history per se, there's not a whole lot of focus on it. What you hear about more is that by being born into a human body, you are blessed with the opportunity to be able to focus your mind on the Almighty and living a good and proper life, as it were. And then as a result of that, you may have an opportunity, come the end of your physical life, whereby your soul joins with that of the Almighty, and exits the cycle of births and deaths.
Now, scientists, on that, and so I take it then the reincarnation concept is something that you actually embraced when you embraced Sikhi.
When I embrace it, it's not something that I focus on. There are some people who get very involved, and they think about whether or not the spirit evolves and the physical body evolves, and whether or not you go up or down, as it were, down the scale. I didn't really concern myself with that as much. What I looked at more as, what's the Guru's hukam for me, right? The Guru's hukam for me is to, conduct myself well, treat, my fellow members of, the human family in a manner that, is, befitting of the respect that they deserve. And similarly with all the other creatures that we have on God's green earth. And then so long as I, take care of my side of the equation, the hukam, that Vaheguruji will take care of the rest of it come time. Ultimately, when we're done with this physical body, I don't really have a choice in the matter regardless, and so I didn't allow myself to be too concerned with it one way or the other.
In life after death, again it comes to the heaven and hell thing, but what happens, did you look into that, what happens when you die?
So there's a number of folks that think differently on this, and I beg forgiveness from those who know and have studied more about this, among our Sikh scholars. But the message that I took away from it was that you very much have an opportunity to exit the cycle, as it were, because when we live in life, irrespective of how good we are, there is suffering and pain along the way, as much as there is happiness and joy. And so you have an opportunity to exit that whole particular cycle, as it were, and become at peace, and part of the Almighty, as it were. So that's really the message that I took away from it, and that's kind of really how I view it. What's more interesting right now, actually, is how this impacts the discussion that's currently being had in Canada, and perhaps it's being had in the UK and other parts of the world as well, which is doctor-assisted suicide, right? What would Sikh people have to say about that? What would Sikh scholars have to say about that? Because it's not something that's delineated directly, whether it be the Guru Granth Sahib Ji or any of the other interpretive texts, in the same way that no one's talking about space travel. Right, but the assumption is that Sikh people can go into space, and it'd be lovely to have a Sikh astronaut, right? And whatnot. But on the doctor-assisted suicide piece, it's a hot topic right now in Canada. We know that legislation is coming before the House of Commons to be discussed, and never mind what the Sikh religious position is. I don't see the Sikh community participating as part of the conversation, and I think that's unfortunate.
That's very unfortunate, and my little knowledge on this topic is the Sikh thought would say along the lines that you face life as it comes, as it's given to you, and your challenge, as it were, is to overcome your hurdles. But in terms of when you're in so much pain, and getting assistance through the medical facilities that exist to end that pain. I'm not exactly sure what Sikh thought would be, and I would again, this is a participatory show. We're not sat here knowing all the answers.
Yeah, we don't pontificate, as it were.
and we actually want to hear from the viewers as well, and those from Canada as well, because this is a hot topic, about what their views are on this subject. What does Sikh thought, or what does the viewers think about medically assisted suicide?
Yeah, well, and the conversation actually exists on two sides of the coin, meaning right now we're talking about the patient perspective, and I think that your words were particularly instructive, meaning that our Guru, generally asks us to face, the challenges that we have in life. But also too, we have it on the flip side, meaning that many Sikh people are doctors. Let's say you don't necessarily always get to choose who your clients are, right? Particularly in a hospital setting. What message does there exist within Sikhism for those Sikh doctors that are being asked to assist in ending the life of a patient, whether that patient is sick or non-sick, as the case may be?
And that's actually an excellent question. Really, if the Sikh doctors out there, please, get in touch through email or through the telephone number, and give us your views, because I think that helps further the debate.
Yeah.
Actually, talking about furthering the debate is actually starting from the beginning. The Big Bang, the Big Bang theory. I mean, how was the world created? I've never really looked into the matter. did you ever look into, the Christianity, of the faith that you came from, obviously the 7 days, and God created the world.
Yeah.
And did you look into that side of things?
For me, I always, gravitated towards the more scientific approach. I'm very interested, on a personal level in, how the universe was created and how some of the theories are about how the universe will end, in fact, right? Because they talk about how there's, a limited amount of energy that exists and the universe keeps expanding, and then eventually everything will go dark. And effectively at that time itself will cease to exist. But
And this is the scientific approach?
That's one of the theories that get put forward. I was never particularly strident in any view. Like, we do know that, for example, there are certain Christian groups who are very adamant about creationism, to the point where they feel it should be taught in schools. And indeed, not so much in Canada, but in the United States, we have creationist facilities. I think they're described as museums. I hesitate to call it that, but that advocate for the propagation of the creationist worldview. From a Sikh perspective, what I always found, was that Vaheguruji, lifts this burden from my shoulders. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that, that the scripture as it's written causes me to not have to concern myself particularly with the exact answer to this question, almost to the point where the creation of the universe was a supernatural event by a supernatural being, and because I myself, Martin Singh, and all the other human beings on earth are by definition not supernatural, it's not something that we'll know, the final answer to particularly. And so, given that that's the case, we don't need to, beat ourselves up about it or have, arguments, about that particular area of faith.
And also in terms of evolution, in terms of, scientifically, I think the scientific community is very strong in evolution in terms of, the tracing the genes and human genetics and that. But I myself don't know, and I'll read up, put my hand up, because I don't know what the Sikh thought on evolution is. And did you?
Yeah, I mean, from my reading, I don't think it was ever the case that I ever saw, evolution being mentioned explicitly. Again, we have to remember the times in which things were written, and while they are very instructive and forward-thinking, they didn't deal with, every single issue. Climate change, for example, also was not written about, in the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, although, inside the scripture, we can find, instructive direction being provided to us, meaning that on the environmental issue, you can say, we are tasked with the responsibility of, taking care of ourselves, our family, our home, our community. By extension, I would say that Mother Earth would be included in that. And indeed, I would say that we're obligated as Sikh people to try to work towards, maintaining a health.
I think there's direction there in terms of to taking care of the environment.
Yeah, they just they don't mention specific issues necessarily, right? And so there's certainly words to speak about a green Sikhi movement. By contrast, I don't think that you would see it explicitly written, evolution necessarily. However, what I really think is fantastic about our particular faith is that it doesn't ask us to run counter to science, right, in any particular way. Meaning that, we are able to, study science in all its wonders and all its diversity, and be able to extract from that those things that make life better, and take precautions and the instructive lessons from those things that may harm or hurt us.
Just coming back to our faith, and obviously Guru Granth Sahib being our, the living Guru, as it were. Yes. It's written in poetic form. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's times that it needs to be interpreted for today's society, or and it gets reinterpreted every 50 years or so, or is this message just what was written at the time, and it's got to be thought of at the time, and got to stay at the time, and viewed from that perspective?
Yeah, I think that the message is a message for all time. I really do. I think that Sikh people would benefit, particularly the younger generation that's not learning Punjabi, would benefit from, a text or a series of texts that were more consumable, right? In terms of being able to read it. Like the English version that I tend to gravitate towards is the Bhagwant Singh version. I gravitate towards that. One, because there's a very good opening introduction piece there that describes all the history and whatnot. That's very, very helpful. Also, two, what happens is that while it makes it a much slower read, they go through it and they identify all of the separate words that are really difficult to translate, and provide meaning to each of those. And so you have a really comprehensive feel for what's being stated. However, even with all that being done, I would say that it's not really accessible, right? Unfortunately. I mean, when we think about, goals in terms of accessibility with literature, newspapers are written at a grade 6 level. Now, that's not necessarily to say that we would want, an English translation of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji written at a grade 6 level. That's not what we want. But I would go as far to say that the texts written on, what the lessons are to be learned and what the instructions are contained therein should be written at a level that is, able to be accessed by the general populace.
There's one question someone asked me, and I really didn't know the answer. And like Nostradamus had many prophecies for the future. I am pretty sure that Guru Granth Sahib is not does have prophecies for the future. But did you ever look at that angle of Sikhi in terms of prophecies?
Not really. I mean, when we look at our Sikhism, there's the scripture as it exists, and then there's the stories that surround that. Even in there is some controversy, because we know that there are some Sikh people who interpret those stories as bona fide fact, right? Whereas there's others, including myself, who would say that the stories are there as instructive lessons, right? And I don't think it does any harm to have people, talk about it in either particular way, so long as that they understand the message that was actually trying to be shared by Guruji and those around him, when the message was trying to be put out to those people who were just becoming Sikhs for the very first time. But yeah, it's not something. I mean, that's the thing that's so really truly liberating about the Sikh faith, is that we don't have to burden ourselves with these particular questions that consume volumes and volumes for folks in other faiths. And so for me, it was, I don't know, I wouldn't say it was necessarily the weight lifted off my shoulders, but I would certainly say that Guruji gave us the instruction to live a working life, and also gave us a faith that caused us to be able to have the time to engage in that working life instead of being, bogged down over, esoteric questions of faith.
Yeah, and I mean, my understanding, Guru Granth Sahib, it's between the soul and its creator, and that's that liberation that's there. And the other question I do get asked by a Christian evangelical was, just as you have to come through Jesus for heaven and hell. Obviously, we've discussed heaven and hell recently, but we don't. The Guru, what role does it play in a Sikh's life? And does it, the Son of God, as in the way that Jesus is described? But what is the role of the Guru for a Sikh?
Yeah, for me, the way I always interpreted it was, Sikhana, right? I am the student, right? And I'm the one who learns. And of course, the opposite role to play in that one would be as the teacher, right? Now, I wouldn't, say that the gurus were, simply teachers, although teaching is a fantastic profession, and no disrespect to those who follow that. But I would say that, it's a teacher who had the inspired light. Moreover, there are parts of our Sikhism which are instructive to us into how that divine light, is to be interpreted by us. Meaning that we know from, the way we read the Guru Granth Sahib Ji who wrote what. I mean, that's pretty clear. Whether, it's written out, clearly by name or by the symbology that exists within the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. However, contained within that also too is the understanding that it's the same divine light that started with Guru Nanak Dev Ji and traveled all the way through. And so for me, my job is to be a student of the faith throughout my entire life. There will always be aspects that I am, not 100% familiar with, and I would argue that there, is much more that I can learn. And so, the Guru for me is, that the highest of the highest, spiritual instructors, that's provided me with the very blessed opportunity to have the faith path that I believe in.
I have another question, and again, it's again being born into the faith and coming to the faith. Mm-hmm. For those of us who are born into faith, or even for those who are coming into the faith, mm-hmm. what would you recommend as the study pattern? To read.
Ooh, that's really difficult. That's really difficult because all folks are kind of different, Like, for me, the approach was really an academic one, right? Like I had certain questions in my head that I was,
And what are those questions?
looking for answers to. Well, like, for example, I was particularly interested in learning, what the Sikh faith had to say about humanity itself, right? And so those parts that attracted me very much initially were the, questions of equality, whether it be male-female equality, caste equality, and that type of thing. And then you take those theological aspects and you combine it with the historical context, meaning that this is not someone who was talking about, say, gender equality, during the women's rights movement in the 1960s. It's someone who was talking about, gender equality back, in the late 1400s. And that's particularly instructive, right? And so, yeah, that was really my approach. And so I went through the process of reading a whole series, of different texts, holding, some closer than others, and really taking my time with it, as it were.
Which text did you read?
Well, the Gurbaj Singh Singhtala version, in English was the most self-evident one, because that, as best as it can be for me as an English speaker, is the closest that I will get, right? And then, you have other interpretive texts, one that I may have mentioned on a previous show, the concept of man in Sikhism, right? For me, it was really, instructive because I don't know, it spoke from my perspective, I guess, as I should say, because what happens, and this is a challenge, when we read through, like let's say, for example, you're doing your, the Hukmanama on any particular day. And although I don't really speak Punjabi, I can read phonetically the Gurmukhi script. And so, my wife and I, sit side by side. I read it through. She provides the correction on my pronunciation. But then when you go to any number of the online sources for, the actual translation or what it speaks to, it appears to be very, very repetitive, right? And the message does not seem to be at all clear. Whereas if you're able to, step back from that and choose, some of the, the different resources well, and that's not necessarily those that speak, or use the text as it exists, but rather more the interpretive forms, then what happens is that you're able to really see deeper into Sikhism and see what it's all about, right? And learn that. So that was kind of my path, but I don't necessarily believe that that's the only path, that people have to follow into Sikhism to be able to understand it well. I don't know many other converts.
I was going to ask, actually, have you ever met other Sikhs, people who've come into Sikh faith?
Yeah, I have. In fact, there's one other, who I know very well. I mean, when she started going to the Gurdwara back in Halifax, Nova Scotia, it was me and a few others that would pick her up, and give her a drive. She and I got along, very well. She's a member of the Canadian Navy, and I'm also a member of the Armed Forces, but on the Army side, and so we had, something in common, and and she's, taken her path, her journey into Sikhism very seriously, and I believe she's taken Amrit, and wears it to star and that type of thing, and so and she's a fantastic human being, and so she, despite having come more recently to the Sikh faith, she I think really embodies the values, right, that are contained therein. And again, I don't know the details of her particular story well, but I can tell you that some of the similarities that existed there between she and I was that it was a process of self-discovery on her own part, meaning that she had in her mind what her belief was in terms of a faith perspective in the same way that I did, and then she searched it out and found it in the same way that I searched it out and found it.
How do you think that's the Western notion of secularism, right? I mean, we've just got a few minutes left, and probably the last sort of question I have on this point. Secularism and Sikhism, how does it fit in? Or does it not?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that it necessarily does fit, but that's okay, A Sikh's job is not necessarily to conform, right? A Sikh's job is to be a good Sikh, right? And by extension of that, to be a good human being. And so my responsibility is to make sure that I, live according to the Guru's hukam. Beyond that, my family, and beyond that, as far as my community is willing to listen to me, I try to, espouse those aspects of the Sikh faith, that speak to, righteous living, to live by those values.
I've asked you this question before. There's a few people who've joined the Sikh faith. The future of Sikhism, right? What do you see it as? Do you see more people joining the Sikh faith from outside, or how does that, how do you think that's going to?
Yeah, I think that you may see some more folks joining from the outside, but it has to become much more accessible, right? Right now, let's just take Canada for example, and I don't know what it's like in the UK, but I'd be interested to hear it from you. All of the services pretty much are done in Punjabi. I shouldn't say all, but the overwhelming majority of the services are done in Punjabi. Clearly the population of this country is not Punjabi speaking, right? It's either, largely English or French. And so what it means is that the ability for the general population, for those who would be interested or in their own minds are Sikh people, even though they don't describe themselves as such, it's going to be exceedingly difficult for them to be able to touch that. And I think that's unfortunate, not because we're an evangelical faith by any means. We don't go out and knock on doors and say, hey, become a Sikh, you don't need to shave or anything like that, But I would say that for those folks for whom the message would be a very positive one, it's unfortunate that they don't have the ability to reach out and access it as quickly and easily as they should.
Actually, you asked about the UK. I mean, I can think of three names just off the top of my head who actually do a lot of prachar in English. And they came on the Sikh channel, Baljeet Singh, Sukraj Singh, I think, from Yorkshire, and Jigraj Singh from Basics of Sikhi.
Correct, yes.
I can think of those names. And those, and that wasn't there when I was growing up. It was very much a case of Punjabi being the language, and it still is by and large. But there is some movement. I can't think of a lady, who's doing prachar. I can't think of one which maybe something that. Unless there is someone, I can't think of anyone off the top of my head in the UK or here.
Correct.
And I think that's a need for our future generations, is both the males and females who are born and brought up in the respective countries contribute to that discussion, contribute to the furthering of Sikhi in the native language. Because obviously now, from the Sikh channel, because being a global channel, you do see Sikhs in Italy. TV programs done in Italy, as we see on the channel itself, and there's now a generation of Italian Sikhs,
correct,
and Greek Sikhs, and there's I think there's a Gurdwara opening in Cyprus, and that was the Sikh channel. So it'd be really very, very interesting, and it might be actually be the case that Punjabi be the only common language amongst them, right?
Quite right, you are.
that's going to be really interesting. So you might have a Canadian Sikh or a UK Sikh and talking to an Italian Sikh, and the language that they find in common is Punjabi.
Correct.
So the value of teaching Punjabi to your kids is now even greater, I think, in order to connect as a global community. I'm looking at the clock because that's all the time we have for this week.
As always, it's a pleasure.
It's great. As like we say to each week, please, viewers, if you have comments, suggestions, concerns, we would love to hear from you. You see our email address and our telephone number. On this very note, I'd like to thank our viewers for watching Martin and myself, and I wish you a Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.